I've never told anyone this. Not my husband. Not my children. Not even my closest friends. It's a secret I've carried for years, one that weighs heavier with every passing day. Have you ever done something so out of character, so far removed from the person you thought you were, that you barely recognize yourself when you look back? Have you ever felt so alive that, for a moment, you forgot everything, who you are, where you come from, even the promises you made? That's what happened to me. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I sought out. But it happened. It started with a trip. A trip I told myself was just for me, my chance to see the world, to explore, to finally do something for myself after a lifetime of routines and responsibilities. My husband didn't want to come. He said it wasn't his thing, that he'd rather stay home. And, honestly, I didn't fight him on it. Deep down, I think I wanted to go alone. Africa. I'd always dreamed of it. The colors, the sounds, the wild beauty of it all. It felt like another world, a place untouched by the weight of my own life. I thought it would be an escape, a chance to clear my head, to find something I didn't even know I was looking for. And then, I met him. It was an ordinary moment, really. I was wandering through a bustling market, trying to take it all in, the sights, the smells, the voices calling out from every corner. I must have looked lost because he appeared out of nowhere, offering to help. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. His smile was warm, disarming, like he could see straight through me. He spoke with an ease, a confidence that made me feel safe. Valued. Seen. I told myself it was nothing. Just a friendly guide helping a tourist. But the way he looked at me, like I was more than just a tired, aging woman, it stirred something in me. Something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know then what it would lead to. How could I? But I'll never forget that moment. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming, something that would change everything. And now, here I am, all these years later, asking myself, what do I do with this secret? Do I keep it buried, or do I finally tell the truth? Do I risk everything to unburden my soul? Or do I let it fade into the past, like a dream I was never supposed to have? At first, it was all so innocent. I told myself that. We were just talking, two people from different worlds sharing stories, exchanging pieces of our lives. He would tell me about the traditions of his village, the festivals, the music, the way they honored their ancestors. There was a pride in his voice, a love for his home that I couldn't help but admire. He was curious about my life, too, how I spent my days, what it was like to raise a family, to live in a place so different from his. And I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years. I told him about my childhood, my dreams, even the things I'd lost along the way. There was something about him, something I couldn't quite explain. He listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole being. His eyes never wandered, his attention never faltered. When he spoke to me, I felt alive. I tried to ignore the spark I felt whenever he smiled at me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things. After all, what could a young man like him possibly see in someone like me? But then there were the little moments, like the way he'd brush his hand against mine when handing me something, or the way his laughter would linger, warm and inviting, long after the joke was over. And then came the turning point. One afternoon, we were walking through a small village. He pointed out a stall selling handmade bracelets, delicate beads strung together in vibrant patterns. I admired them, but I didn't think much of it. Later that evening, as we sat under the stars, he handed me a bracelet, one I hadn't seen before, its colors perfectly matching the dress I'd worn that day. I thought it would look beautiful on you, he said. It was such a small thing, really. Just a simple bracelet. But it felt like more than that. It felt like he saw me, not as a tourist, not as some older woman passing through, but as me. I should have walked away then. I should have thanked him and left. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself linger in the moment, in the warmth of his attention. I told myself it was harmless, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it in the way my heart raced whenever he was near, in the way his touch lingered just a little longer than it should have. I started to crave his company, his laughter, his voice. He made me feel something I hadn't felt in decades, a lightness, a joy, a sense of being seen and wanted. And with every passing day, it became harder to ignore. But there was always the guilt, lurking in the background. I'd think of my husband, of the promises I'd made, of the life I'd built. I told myself I was a terrible person, that I was being selfish, reckless. But no matter how much I tried to push it away, the pull of him was stronger. And so, I let myself fall, knowing full well that there would be no easy way back. I don't think I've ever laughed the way I did with him. He had this way of pulling me out of myself, of making me forget the weight of the years I carried. We explored the markets, weaving through the crowds, bargaining for trinkets. He would tease me whenever I tried to haggle, saying my accent gave me away every time. And then there were the quieter moments, the ones that still linger in my mind like fragments of a dream. I remember the day he took me to a hidden spot overlooking the plains, just as the sun began to set. We sat there, side by side, watching the sky come alive with colors I didn't know existed. He told me that sunsets reminded him of life's fleeting beauty, of how every moment should be cherished. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free to laugh. Free to feel. Free to just be. He made me feel beautiful. Not just on the outside, but in a way that went deeper. I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt seen, truly seen, and wanted. And then, that night came. The rain had been falling steadily all evening, drumming against the roof like a heartbeat. We were at the small guest house where I was staying. The power had gone out, so we lit candles, their soft glow dancing on the walls. We sat close, sharing stories, our voices low, as if afraid to disturb the quiet intimacy of the moment. I don't know who moved first, him or me, but suddenly, there was no space between us. His hand brushed mine, and I remember the way my breath caught in my throat. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as though he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. When his lips met mine, it was like the world stood still. There was no rain, no candles, no guilt, just him and me, lost in something that felt inevitable. It wasn't just passion, it was connection, a raw and unspoken understanding between two souls. Afterward, I lay awake, the sound of the rain mingling with the rush of my own thoughts. I felt everything at once, joy, fear, guilt. I thought of my husband, of the life waiting for me back home, but those thoughts felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. We didn't talk about what had happened the next morning, but we didn't need to. There was a tenderness in the way he looked at me, a silent acknowledgement of what we'd shared. It wasn't long before we admitted what we both already knew, that we had feelings for each other. He told me I made him feel grounded, that I gave him a sense of calm he'd never known before. And I told him the truth, that he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in decades. We both knew we couldn't be open about it. We couldn't let the world see. I was married, after all, and the age gap alone would have been enough to spark whispers. But in those stolen moments, it didn't matter. The world faded away, and it was just us. Those days became a whirlwind of secret touches, shared laughter, and fleeting moments of bliss. But even in the height of it all, there was a shadow, a quiet voice in the back of my mind reminding me that this couldn't last. That no matter how much I wanted it to, I would have to say goodbye. I thought I could keep it separate, that I could live in the moment and leave it all behind when it was time to go. But the guilt, oh, the guilt. It seeped into the edges of every joyful moment, reminding me of what I was doing. At night, when the world was quiet, it would hit me the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and think of my husband. He wasn't a bad man. He was kind, steady, dependable. But somewhere along the way, we'd become strangers sharing the same house. I used to wonder if he noticed how quiet it had become between us or if he'd simply learned to accept it, the same way I had. And then there was him, the man who had turned my world upside down. He was nothing like my husband. He was fiery, passionate, unpredictable. He made me feel things I thought I'd buried for good. But was I being selfish? Was I risking everything I'd built, everything I'd vowed to honor, for a fleeting moment of happiness? As the days passed, the reality of our time together began to creep in. I knew it couldn't last. My trip was coming to an end, and the life I had left behind was waiting for me. But the thought of leaving him, it felt like tearing my heart in two. The night before I left, I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I couldn't find the words to say goodbye. Instead, we spent the evening like we always did, laughing, talking, holding on to the illusion that we had all the time in the world. But the next morning, as I stood at the airport, I saw him one last time. He had come to see me off, his eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't bear to look at for too long. He didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't offer him a reason to hope. "I'll never forget you," he said. His voice was soft, but his words carried a weight I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed up, and all I could do was nod. He reached out, his hand brushing mine one last time, and then he was gone. As the plane lifted off, I looked out the window, watching the land that had become my escape fade into the distance. I felt the weight of everything settle onto my chest, his words, his touch, his love. And the guilt. It was heavier than I ever imagined it could be. I had betrayed my husband, my vows, the life I had built. But at the same time, I had found a piece of myself I thought was gone forever. I didn't know how to reconcile the two. All I knew was that I couldn't undo what had been done, and I couldn't forget him, not his face, not his voice, not the way he made me feel alive again. When I stepped off the plane and back into my life, I knew I would carry the memory of him with me. But I also knew that the weight of what I'd done would follow me, too. And no matter how much time passed, no matter how far away I was, I would never truly be free of it. When I stepped back into my home, it was as if nothing had changed. The same walls, the same furniture, the same familiar scent of coffee brewing in the morning. My husband greeted me with a warm smile and a casual, "How was the trip?" As though I'd just been on any ordinary vacation. I smiled back, nodded, and said, "It was fine." But inside, I felt like a stranger. At first, I thought I could slip back into the life I'd left behind, that I could tuck my secret away like an old photograph no one ever sees. I tried to focus on the familiar, cooking dinner, folding laundry, sitting across from my husband at the table as we ate in silence. But it was in that silence that it hit me the hardest. He didn't notice it at first, the way I would drift off in the middle of conversations or stare out the window for just a little too long. He didn't see the way I would trace the edges of a memory in my mind, trying to hold on to it just a little longer before it faded. I wasn't the same woman who had left for that trip. At night, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying it all in my head. The sound of his laugh, the warmth of his touch, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Those memories would come rushing back, unbidden, and they were so vivid it was as if he were still there with me. But then, just as quickly, the guilt would flood in. I'd hear my husband's voice, see his face, feel the weight of the years we'd spent together. I'd remember the vows we made, the life we built, and I'd feel like the worst kind of person. I started dreaming about him, the young man I left behind. Sometimes it was the happy moments, the laughter, the sunsets, the way he made me feel alive. But other times, it was the look on his face when I walked away, the sound of his voice when he said, "I'll never forget you." Those dreams would stay with me long after I woke up, lingering in the quiet moments of the day. I'd find myself wondering what he was doing, if he was happy, if he thought of me the way I thought of him. And then I'd feel it again, the sharp sting of guilt, the ache of knowing I'd betrayed the man who had trusted me most. I started asking myself questions I couldn't answer. Was I searching for something I'd lost in my marriage? Or was it something I never had? Was it just the thrill of being seen, of being wanted? Or was it more than that? I didn't know how to reconcile it all. I loved my husband, I did. But I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that had come alive in Africa, a part of me that had been dormant for so long I'd forgotten it existed. And so, I carried the weight of my secret, day after day, year after year. I hid it behind forced smiles and quiet nights, pretending that everything was fine, that I was fine. But inside, I felt like I was unraveling, one thread at a time. Sometimes, I wonder if he ever thinks of me. If he remembers the woman who walked into his life for just a moment, then disappeared. And I wonder if he knows that not a day goes by that I don't think of him, too. I've spent years trying to silence the questions in my mind, but they've only grown louder. And now, as I sit here, bearing my soul to you, I wonder if it's time to finally tell the truth. Do I confess to my husband? The man who's been my partner, my constant, my home for all these years? Do I tell him that while he was here, holding down the life we built together, I was halfway across the world, finding something I didn't even know I was looking for? Do I tell my children? The ones who look up to me, who trust me, who believe I've always been the mother they thought I was. What would they think of me, knowing their mother, a woman they've seen as steady and dependable, once gave in to something so reckless, so selfish? And then there's the hardest question of all, if I confess, will it change how I see myself? You see, this secret. It's like a weight I've carried for so long that I can't remember what it feels like to stand tall. It's shaped me, molded me, made me question everything I thought I knew about who I am. Sometimes, I convince myself it's better this way. To keep it hidden. To lock it away where no one else can see it. But then I wonder, am I being cowardly? Am I protecting them, or am I protecting myself? I ask myself over and over, can a single moment of selfish happiness undo a lifetime of loyalty? Or does it prove that I've been living a lie all along? And yet, I can't shake the memory of him. The way he made me feel. The way he looked at me like I was more than just a wife or a mother or a woman of a certain age. He saw me. He made me feel alive. And that scares me because if I felt that way then, what does it say about the life I've been living now?